Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 14 of the Blackbird Chronicles. I hope you're enjoying your weekend. So today I wanted to go through a few things, and of course, I'll take questions and in the chat. So I wanted to go through the Gaming Quality Index, which is a new equation or tool that I launched last week to try and give a better feel for how the game, the playability of the game and the smoothness and the quality of gameplay versus just the raw numbers, which can be a little deceiving, and I'll show you that. Let's see. Also, I wanted to talk a little bit about AI and how effective it can be in tuning and optimizing components for PCs. I'll touch on maybe that planning a build if we have time, and then I do want to talk about the giveaway and the PC build because I've actually finished the build, and that will be the next video. And so I do plan to do the giveaway in a couple of weeks. So the plan is next week will be the actual video showing the build, going through that, and then the following week I'll do a live stream. So 2 weeks from today, that's my tentative plan, is to do the giveaway on that live stream. So basically the next live stream. I tend to do a live stream every couple of weeks. Hey, great to have you here, Scott, and that's great. I'm glad that you're able to join today live. That's fantastic. So let's see. Let's jump in here. I probably should have. I sent out the reminder for this live stream way early, which is never a good thing. So I'm sure it'll pop up and people will join as we get moving here. So let me jump in here and let's see. I need to turn on this window. Nope, wrong window. This window. There we go. Okay. Still getting the hang of things on OBS after all of this time. But it is pretty awesome software. So, Gaming Quality Index. I'm going to go through this in a lot of detail in the next video. But there's two main parts to the equation. And let me back up. The challenge is when you look at just your standard benchmarks, you see average FPS typically and 1% lows for channels that know what they're doing, right? Otherwise they just show average FPS, which is basically useless, right? And what you really want to show is you want to show the relative performance difference between components, whether it's GPUs or CPUs, and your testing methodology should reflect that. You don't want to test CPUs with your GPU carrying all the load, because that makes no sense, and you don't want to test your GPU with the CPUs carrying all the load, right? So just some basics. When you look at those numbers, you get a sense of kind of who wins the average battle, and a little bit of a sense of who wins the 1% load battle. What you don't get, though, is an appreciation for the quality of the gameplay. And so that's what led to this. So in our Skool community, I floated the idea of developing a gaming quality index, and I came up with my first equation, and I had some great feedback with the community. And then, someone in the community had said, that's great, but the difference between your average and 1% lows can be a challenge, which is true. And so I ended up going with this equation, and it's split into two parts. So there's the front part, which is this part of the equation, the front part. So that's a 1% low FPS over 60 FPS. And then there's the second part. So the first part is really just about defining what a quality gaming experience looks like. And I'm specifically using the 1% lows here and putting a high bar and saying, if the 1% lows are consistently above 60 FPS, you're going to have a good gaming experience. And I use 60 FPS intentionally. You could change that. So if you're doing a first-person shooter, it may be 120 FPS. I would argue it's not necessary because you're just going to get higher GQIs and you can still compare amongst different games and components and other things, right? But I chose 60 FPS as the standard for the 1% lows. In the past, 60 FPS has been the standard for the average FPS, but I don't think that cuts it. It needs to be 1% lows, right? So, by the way, there's two ways to calculate 1% lows. Most good applications calculate it by taking the total benchmark time and taking 1% of that total time and looking at all the frames. Frames will have different pacing that fit within that 1%. And that's how you get your 1% lows, right? Some do it on number of frames, which isn't, I don't think it's as good a measure of 1% lows, right? So just bear that in mind. I'm not going to get into details of what they mean, but that's essentially what I'm trying to say, is that your kind of lowest frames, poorest performing frames, are at least at 60 or above. You'll have an amazing gaming experience. The second part of but that's not all of it, right? The second part of the equation was set up to basically say the ideal gaming environment is your 1% lows being equal to your average FPS. It never happens, but that's your ideal gaming environment. That basically means that it will be super smooth, no variations in frame times, right? Frame rate, by the way, is just 1 over the frame time. So they're the same thing, interchangeable. But there'll be no variation. Think about, you shouldn't have to think too hard about this, but looking at the real world through your eyes is the 1% lows are equal to the average, right? Because it doesn't matter how chaotic things are in the world, you will still see that image through your eyes at the same pacing as when there's nothing going on. That doesn't happen in computer games, of course, because you've got to compute those images and render those images. But that's the ideal situation. If you had that situation in a game, it would feel butter smooth, absolutely smooth, right? So now if your 1% lows are 60 or above and your 1% lows and average FPS are the same, you're going to have a truly phenomenal gameplay experience. That's what this equation is trying to get to. And then to represent it, it's simple. Now here's where, and I'm going to show you some data in a moment from different past videos that I've done. So yesterday I sat down and calculated them all because I wanted to get a feel for, does this really feel right? So a good gameplay experience is, I think this is reasonable, that the GQI is greater than or equal to 1. It could be 2.5, which just means it's an exceptional gameplay experience. But I just wanted to define that, right? The poor gameplay experience I have is less than 0.7, and the average is 0.7 to 1. Now, this is where I may need to change things a little. A poor gameplay experience you could potentially define as 0.5. That would mean your 1% lows, ignoring the second half of the equation, are around 30. I don't think that's, I mean, yes, that's poor, but I think we should expect more out of our PC than just kind of 30, right? Hey Cody, thanks for joining us, buddy. So, and I've just started off, so you don't, there's not much to catch up on, and you're part of the community that was involved in this, so you're already familiar with this. Okay, so that's where we're starting with the equation. Let's see, I'll tell you, some people have pointed out that you can simplify the equation. You absolutely can. So if you want to go and calculate this yourself in a spreadsheet, you can just put this equation in. It's the same thing. However, the reason I don't show it this way is because you lose the reasoning behind why I developed the two terms. So in this form of the equation, I can talk about the first part and the second part. In this form of it's like a mathematical simplification. It's really hard to, like, why are you squaring the 1% lows? So just keep that in mind. You can do this, and that's the easier way to input this in a spreadsheet or do the calculation. So feel free to do that. So I wanted to look at a few examples. So let's start with the video I did recently on the 9800X3D versus 265K, 9700X and 9600X. And I think this is a good video because it's a lot of components and you get a sense for how the GQI might change. So if you just look at 1080p low settings, the 9800X3D dominates, right? And that's what the bold underline is. This is the one that's winning. It dominates across the board, but they all give a great experience. Now, these are paired with a 5090, so keep that in mind. But they all give a phenomenal experience, all of these CPUs. Okay, in Total War Warhammer 3, the 9600X doesn't quite cut it, 0.91, but that's still pretty good. The rest of it, I mean, yes, the 9800X3D is better than the other CPUs, but the actual gameplay experience isn't going to be too different whether you're, in say Call of Duty Black Ops 6 2.93 versus 2.6 shouldn't feel appreciably different, right? But I would still go for the higher number, of course, right? Now, when you look at 4K Ultra settings, some weird things happen. So first of all, the 265K is dominating. Arguably is dominating. Even in Call of Duty Black Ops 6, where the 9800X3D wins, the 1.65 versus 1.62 are virtually identical. Hey Rowan, welcome to Blackbird PC Tech. Thanks for joining. So I would argue here pretty easily that the 265K wins in 4K, and I'm gonna show you some data, and so that we can see if it makes sense. But stepping back for a moment, you may ask, and people have, why is the 265K a chip that is arguably not as marketed as well as the 9800X3D doing better at 4K? So a couple of things to keep in mind. I've tuned and optimized all of these CPUs, so you don't typically see that on channels. I've also selected optimum RAM to run with the 265K here and all of the chips, but specifically for Intel because it scales well with RAM. I chose DDR5 8800 for the 265K. And so what you're seeing here is what I believe is happening, and I can verify it, I just haven't had time, is that at 4K, the 9800X3D 3D V cache is getting saturated with information, and it's spilling over into the system RAM. And so the reason that the 265K is doing better is its system RAM is so much faster than the system RAM. I think I used DDR5 8000, but remember, it's in 2-to-1 mode, right? Because for AM5, once you go over about 6400, you move to 2-to-1 mode. So UCLK is equal to MCLK on 2 for above around 6400. So these were the highest performing, at DDR5 8000 is still the highest performing RAM, even in 2-to-1 mode for AM5. And you can look at my videos to show you that. But that's what I believe is happening here. And so that's why the 9800 essentially mimics the 9700X at 4K, right? It's 0.64 to 0.62, 0.95 to 0.95. It's identical, right? 1.03 to 0.76, so there's an advantage in MS Flight Simulator. 1.65 to 1.64 in Call of Duty Black Ops 6. 0.72 to 0.71 in Black Myth Wukong. So I do believe that that's the reasoning behind why you're seeing the result you do. At 1080p, the 3D V cache is sufficient to not spill over into the memory as much. And so I believe that's what's happening. And that makes sense. Bigger textures, a lot more information happening because you're at ultra settings versus low settings, 4K versus 1080p. So the question is, does this really make sense? So let's take a look here, right? Yes, Joey, these CPUs are highly tuned and optimized, right? And you can see that in the video. So let's look at Warhammer 3. So in Warhammer 3, just to take a look, right? We'll look at 4K because it's way more interesting. You see that the 265K appears to have quite a significant advantage, nearly green, compared to the other processors. Let's just focus on the 9800X3D. Does that make sense? Okay, so 4K Ultra, Total War Warhammer, the 265K has much higher 1% lows, so that's an advantage, right? 81.8 versus 64.4. And the difference between the average high and the average 1% low is smaller than this blue bar. So the blue bar is smaller than this one. So I would argue that's a much better gaming experience. And if you go back, that's what that number says, 0.99 versus 0.64. All right, so let's look at another one. Microsoft Flight Simulator. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator, I actually have it up on my screen here. The 265K was 1.07 and the 9800X3D was 1.03. So very, very close. And so look at the data. Is it close? Well, yeah, 76.1 versus 73.8. That's nearly identical. And the gap here, 88.4 and 90.2, that length of that 1% low here to average is very similar. So these should give nearly identical results. And they do, 1.03 versus 1.87. So I would say that's good, right? And then the last one I want to check for this one before we move on is Black Myth Wukong. Now in Black Myth Wukong, they were all yellow. All of the chips, right? They were all, you know, for 265K, it was 0.75, 9800X3D, 0.72, 0.71 for the 9700X, and 0.73 for the 9600X. And sure enough, they're virtually identical across the board. You know, 1% variation, and the difference between the average, you know, 1% lows and the 1% and the 1% lows, the 1% lows and the average is about the same. So they all should give about the same numbers, and that's what happens. So I would argue that at least for these group of CPUs, that this metric is a reasonable metric, right? So let's see. Let's move on to a new one. All right. This one was remember, I just ran these yesterday, so I was a bit shocked at this. And this is where I may need some refinement in what is red versus yellow, right? I'm comfortable with green being above 1, but yet red and yellow, I may need to refine it. 7900 XTX versus 9070 XTX. They're both Sapphire Nitro Plus cards. So I just went back to the data and looked at these 5 games again, just to kind of be consistent. And take a look at 1440p. The 9070 XT appears to win. However, there's a game, Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and this is a pretty popular game, where the 7900 XTX blows it out of the water. So we certainly want to look at that one. At 4K, it shifts to the 7900 XTX advantage. Now, to me, that would make sense if you're not using upscaling, FSR4, that the 7900 XTX would have an advantage at 4K. It has more VRAM, for example. So I believe that's accurate. Now, it's all red, right? I mean, that means that these GPUs with the CPU, I think it was a 9800X3D, if I'm correct. CPU was at stock conditions, so just bear that in mind. The GPUs for this were in stock conditions, so I hadn't overclocked and undervolted these GPUs here. But this would say that at 4K, neither of these GPUs really gives a great experience, except in Call of Duty Black Ops 6, the 7900 XTX does a good job. 0.94 is close enough to 1 to give a very buttery smooth experience. Cyberpunk 2077, you've got yellow on the 9070 XT. That's because upscaling is on there, and we'll talk about that. But I mean, look at Black Myth Wukong, both of these struggle. So let's look at the data to see if this makes sense. I guess and this is interesting because just on the, if you look at the data, you don't get this feel that something's not right. And again, remember, I arbitrarily set 0.7 as a defining line, GQI of 0.7 between poor and average performance. I may need to drop that to 0.6, right? And if it was 0.6, you'd see a lot more yellow here, right? So, and I'd like to get your feedback, by the way, on this, right? So once you see it. So let's take a look. So first of all, Cyberpunk. Now, Cyberpunk was one, let me just move this along so I can see it. Cyberpunk was one where you had a lot of yellow, right? So that was one where upscaling is turned on, and so there was a fair bit of yellow. Now, upscaling was turned on, but it was quality, which basically meant that the upscaling, you weren't reducing the render resolution to take advantage of upscaling. None of these were doing that. So please bear that in mind. You could certainly generate green results by using upscaling, right? And that's something I need to explore more. I need to do a whole video on this, I think, because it's a lot to explore. For example, I really want to explore frame gen, because if you turn on frame gen in a game and your average FPS explodes, but your 1% lows stay low, that's going to kill your GQI. So I'm interesting. Okay. So pretty yellow across the board. At 4K, the 9070 XT does have an advantage. So let's see what this says. Okay, ignore the 1080p. So in 4K, it said the 9070 XT has an advantage. Yes. So remember, ray tracing, this has ray tracing on. The RDNA 4 graphics cards are significantly better at ray tracing than the RDNA 3 cards. That's what this shows. So yeah, I mean, if you've got a 1% low of 80 versus 66, and you've got a average high of 108.8, now it's going to get penalized a little more than the 7900 XTX because that range is a little higher than the 87.3 to 66. But I mean, its average is just a little bit higher than the 1% lows. I would argue the score, the GQI score, should be much higher for the 9070 XT. So if we go back, it is, right? So 0.98, it's nearly green versus 0.84. Now they're both acceptable, right? Both will give good, average a gameplay, not green, which is interesting. Now, if you look at 4K, 0.6 versus 0.77, so the 9070 XT has an advantage again. The 7900 XTX at 4K is generating 1% lows of 47.3. That's not great. And the average is 61.9. Again, not great. Now, I set the bar high. Remember that. I set the bar at 60 FPS for your 1% lows. That's the target. I think that's a good target. I think that's what we should be aiming for. Imagine if the entire community started using GQI and game developers released a game and it was red everywhere. Don't you think they would be embarrassed by that and actually optimize their games better? I think that's a good thing. I personally think it's a good thing, right? Okay, so let's look at another one. Call of Duty Black Ops 6. Now, in Call of Duty Black Ops 6, the 7900 XTX dominates, like absolutely blows the 9070 XT out of the water. 1.15 green to 0.43 red, 0.94 yellow on the border of green to 0.41 red, all right? So it should show up here. Let's see. At 4K, oh, absolutely, look at that. 79.7 1% lows, and the average is not too much higher, which is it's going to give a good gaming experience. Unfortunately, the 9070 XT has decent average, but the 1% lows are very low. And even at 1440p, the 1% lows are terrible relative to the average high. So you're going to see a lot of like frame pacing issues where you're going to see bursts of very smooth and then all of a sudden it slows down and it's going to feel bad. And that's what the chart says. That's what the GQI says. It says, hey, if you're playing Call of Duty Black Ops 6, get a 7900 XTX. Remember, I do not have upscaling turned on, right? But yeah, you're not using upscaling, get a 7900 XTX. I think 7900 XTX owners would argue that their card is very good at Call of Duty Black Ops 6. And then if you look at Black Myth Wukong, they all sucked, right? 0.6s and 0.3s. So it should show in the performance. And sure enough, at 4K, I don't think anyone would argue that a 1% low of 27 is going to feel smooth. Particularly with now it's going to get an advantage that its averages are not that much more than the 1% lows, but they're 31.9 and 32.6. Not very good. That gameplay experience is going to feel stuttery and slow and awkward, right? I feel that's reasonable. I know it looks harsh, but I feel that's reasonable, right? So Rowan, I'm going to come back to the questions after I'm done with this section, and I'll go through and I'll help answer your questions then, all right? Okay, moving on to the 9950 X3D versus 285K. I think this is an interesting one. A lot more greens on this chart. And again, we're comparing 1080p low settings to 4K ultra settings. So two top chips. And let me emphasize again, both of these chips were tuned and optimized, highly tuned and optimized. The 285K was running DDR5 9000 RAM, right? It's QDIM RAM, and it's at the limit for what you can do in Gear 2 before you switch to Gear 4. 9950 X3D running DDR5 8000, highly tuned and optimized CPU. So keep that in mind. Now, if you look at 1080p, pretty green across the board. I do want to look at Total War Warhammer 3. Why the hell does a 285k suck into Total War Warhammer 3 so much? But then wins in Cyberpunk, and yeah, I mean, I would argue that at 1080p low, I would give the edge to the 9950X3D, but look at Black Myth Wukong. That's a huge advantage to the 285k. And then the 4K Ultra settings are really interesting because they both struggle in Total War Warhammer 3. I gotta understand why Total War Warhammer 3 is killing components. Well, at least the benchmark is, right? I do notice when you play it, you will get stutters and frame pacing issues when you play, because I've played that game heavily. Let's see, a bunch of greens, very similar results in MS Flight Simulator for both. An advantage, small advantage to the 285k at Call of Duty Black Ops 6, and an advantage in Black Myth Wukong. You know, looking at these results, I would say that depending on the game, depends on what CPU you should buy. Again, they're paired with a 5090. Now, that does make a difference at 4K. But again, these are interesting results, and not what you wouldn't get this insight by just looking at performance data alone. So let's take a look at a couple like we did on the previous one. Total War Warhammer 3. Now, again, this is one where, particularly at 4K, both were red, but the 285K was horribly red. And you can see that here. 42 1% low FPS, and a much bigger, nearly equal to the 9950 in average FPS. So the gameplay experience there, you're going to get frame pacing all over the place, right? Because there's a whole bunch of frames that are generated that are going to take longer than some of the frames, and so you're going to see this frame pacing issue. 9950X3D should give a much better gaming experience, and is that shown here? It is 1.27 green versus 0.55 red. I think the only thing that I'm questioning is whether I set the 0.7 low too high. So if I did that at maybe 0.65 or 0.6, that might be better. I got to look at what does that, in a perfect world, what would 0.6 times 60 is 36. Does that make sense? 36, 1% low FPS being average? Maybe not. Maybe 40. Maybe 0.67, maybe 40. Maybe I should drop it to 0.67, which would actually align with the 9950X3D here, making that yellow. I've got to go back and do that, but nonetheless, I think, so that was accurate. Microsoft Flight Simulator, now look at that, 9958. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator has always been, their X3D chips have always done well in Microsoft Flight Simulator. So I'm not surprised by these results. However, look at something. This is interesting. The 285K at 4K does not quite match the 9950X3D, but it's much more consistent. Their average is low, which you would normally think is bad, but it's much more consistent to the 1% lows. Whereas the 9950X3D has a higher high, and its 1% lows are higher. So these are probably going to, some of those are going to offset, and you're probably going to get a similar-ish gaming experience. But look at 1440p. You've got a significantly higher 1% lows for the 9950X3D. Again, the 285K is able to keep more consistent frame pacing than the 9950X3D. So what did that look like? So yeah, so they nearly offset each other at 1080p low, which is good, right? So 1.38 versus 1.28, and they nearly offset each other at 4K Ultra. So that's what I was expecting. This penalizes 9950X3D, and this gives an advantage, but it's a lower, so they nearly offset, and you've got nearly identical scores here. I'm actually pretty happy with that. I think that reflects the gameplay. And then the last one here is Black Myth Wukong. 4K, their 285K is going to give a little bit of an advantage there because it's got higher 1% lows with a similar average. And the same thing, the 285K should give a better it should have a higher score in Black Myth Wukong. Did it? Yep, it did. So 0.71 to 0.58 and 1.96 to 0.9. So yeah, I think that's fair so far. So the last one is going to be a GPU one. This is interesting. Again, oh man, I didn't put that one up. So for me to look at, but that's okay. We'll do it here. So a lot of red. Again, upscaling is really not on unless you're in Cyberpunk. So that's why it's yellow and green. It is on in Black Myth Wukong, but it's not. Upscaling is turned on, but it's at like native settings. So if you're at 4K, it's rendering at 4K, and there's no advantage to using upscaling if you do that. So if I turned upscaling on in performance mode, you would see these turn yellow and green, right? So just keep that in mind. That's an opportunity for both of these cards. They both have excellent upscalers. FSR4 and DLSS4, both phenomenal, right? Very small difference between them. Okay, so lots of red. Not a lot of difference between the cards. Now, when I did the assessment for this video, I said there wasn't a lot of difference. But you see it here. Look at this, nearly identical in Black Myth Wukong. A small advantage to the 5070 Ti in Call of Duty Black Ops 6. A small advantage in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. Nearly identical Cyberpunk, an advantage to the 9070 XT in Cyberpunk here, and virtually nearly identical in Total War Warhammer 3, all right? Now that aligns with my assessment but in the video, but let's take a look. I think that's fair. Now, the only thing I would say, these should be nearly identical in Cyberpunk, except that the 9070 XT has an advantage here, much higher 1% lows, and so it's much more consistent because the gap to the average is smaller. So that should give a higher score, like a noticeably higher score than the 5070 Ti. So let's take a look at that, and you see that. Yeah, 1.14 to 0.8, you see it. Now, in 1440p, in 4K, they're nearly identical, and you saw that in the data. So that's good. Microsoft Flight Simulator. In 1440p, I would argue that they're probably going to offset a little, and then an advantage to the 5070 Ti, right? So offset at 1440p, advantage at 4K. Offset at 1440p, oh yeah, but it's actually favoring the 5070 Ti, the offset there, and they're nearly identical at 4K. Yeah, that seems reasonable. And then the last one, Black Myth Wukong. It should favor the 5070 Ti here. And does it? It does. They both suck. which I mean, that's the thing. If I dropped that lower bounds to 0.67, that would have been yellow. But there is a noticeable advantage to the 5070 Ti. But again, like, you're under 60 FPS for average, let alone 1% low. So it both suck, and I mean really suck at 4K. You know, you're talking about 25 to 28 FPS at the 1% lows, and yeah, 0.37, 0.36, yeah. So I did these yesterday. I never really got a chance to go through them. I wanted to go through them live here just to see. But I would argue that the equation, if we just quickly go back to that, is pretty good, and I think it's doing the right thing. I think this equation is going to be helpful, and I'm going to start using it in all of my videos, but I think it's going to be helpful, particularly for the comparison videos. The only thing I might do is, instead of having it at 0.7, now in a perfect world, 0.7 would be 42 frames per second. So you're saying you drop to anything below 42 frames per second for 1% lows is poor. That's what 0.7 is. I could drop that to 40 instead of 42 frames per second. I mean, you're kind of in the weeds a little bit here. So I might consider doing that. But yeah, I mean, if you have an idea of what you think would improve this, or if you think that there's mistakes or errors, let me know, because I really want to push this as a new metric that is adopted across the whole community. I got some good feedback. I sent it to Linus, and he said he's going to send it across to the labs to see if they're going to start using it. Now, there's not a lot of new components out at the moment, but But nonetheless, I'm going to start doing it in my videos, try and get that more well known and spreading that around. I had someone come on in the chat to the post that I made about this and have a good dialogue about why they thought some things were flawed, and then I explained things, and they were arguing that having a much higher average FPS than the 1% lows was a good thing. And you know, I explained to them how the human brain sees and other things, and they ended up deleting their comment, which kind of sucked because it was a good discussion. So if you have a good discussion on a channel, don't delete your comment, even if you think that you're wrong, just because it can be helpful for others to learn, right? Kind of waste time too. But anyway, okay. So let me catch up on some chat here. I know that there were a few questions that we had. Yep, I talked about that. So from Rowan, I had a question. I want to build a PC with a 5070 Ti and a 285K or 9950. Now that's the 9950X, not the 9950X3D. Is that accurate? For pure productivity. Oh, so I would, okay, even if it's not accurate, don't get the X3D for pure productivity. So I'm currently in this system that I'm using for this running a 9950X, phenomenal CPU. Pure productivity, including Adobe, 3D rendering, animations, casual gaming. Please tell me which is suitable. So I would go for the 285K if it's pure productivity play. Intel just has better support with different software applications from what I've seen. I'm going to be building my wife a new PC on the channel, and I'm going to be using a 285K. She does not play games. She is all about just productivity, rendering, and a bunch of other things. I'm going to put a 5090 in there. She's not going to care. It kind of sucks, but I'm going to do a really cool build on the channel for that. You're going to be good going either way. 9950X is phenomenal. I'm using it now in my system, my productivity system. You can go either way. For the 285K, you want to pair it with high speed RAM. So if you want to go high capacity, you're going to have to drop your speed. For my wife's PC, I think I'm going 6,800 mega transfers per second because I want to go dual rank with as much memory as I can for her, because she has 10,000 Google Chrome tabs open and never closes them. So that uses up actually quite a lot of system RAM. But that I would, the other thing to do is look at the specific software you use and see if the software favors Intel or AMD. Typically it'll favor Intel, which sucks, but it represents the fact that Intel has been dominant for so long, and these software manufacturers tailored their software for Intel CPUs. But that's where my head's at. If you said build a production rig tomorrow, what would you build? I would build a 285K. That's what I would do. Let's see. Yeah, Joey said, or have great, good, fair, and poor scoring ranges. Yeah, you could do that. You could certainly add to the upper end. I like the fact that 1 is green. Maybe you could have a gold or something above that. You could also have, for different genres, we talked about this on our Skool Community with the Blackbird Army, you could have that 60 frames per second, 1% low standard. You could potentially make that 120 for first-person shooters kind of thing. I'm not as comfortable with that. I think modifying the lower bound is probably the right thing to do. So I think that's the right thing. Hey, good to see you, Hoplite. Haven't seen you for a while. This is great info because I have a backup 9700X, 7900 XTX system in my main 9800 X3D, 9070 XT system. Yeah, I mean, 2 good systems for 2 very different reasons. And depending on, if it's an RT, ray tracing heavy title, the 9070 XT is going to be your go-to. If you're using upscaling, 9070 XT. If you're using just rasterized pure performance, 4K, 7900 XTX. That's kind of the way I would use your systems, right? Let's see. Yeah, Hoplite, I agree. Hoplite said, I barely look at max FPS now, just focus on 1% lows. And that's what this came from. Some of my colleagues within the industry, like Jufus, often talks about ignoring average FPS, and he's got a point, right? And I also wanted to capture these concepts of AM dip and other things. It should be in the data, and your GQI should capture that. That's the thing I don't like about making claims like AM dip and just showing it on screen. Like, it should be captured in the data. The GQI should be able to capture that feeling, the gameplay feeling. I had someone on within our Skool community build a 285K system and then have FOMO and build a 9950X3D system and then be disappointed with the response in Windows and other things and went back to a 285K system. That's what the GQI should help you with, give you a sense of that feel, right? For how the gameplay is going to feel. And you know, I saw Gamers Nexus is coming up with super complicated, and they've done a whole bunch of testing and coming up with something super complicated. That's not going to be useful because no one will use it. No one will adopt it. If you have to have a camera and you have to measure this and you have to measure that, no one's going to use it. So that was the intent here, is do something simple, but make it, you know, easy to use and really reflect that gameplay quality, right? Let's see. Rowan asked, do you hear any issues like stability or heating issues with the 285K? So I highly recommend you look at my recent 285K versus 9950X3D review. You'll see all the data. And I don't go on what I hear, I go on what I test. 285K really is an outstanding chip when you tune and optimize it. And I have a guide on the channel for how to do that. If you pair it with fast memory, that's a key here. Tune and optimize, it'll give you phenomenal results, and it's much lower temperatures than Raptor Lake, right? So there's a big advantage there as well. And its idle temps are great too. Yeah, my wife is, I'm gonna have her on the channel with me when I do the build. She's not gonna care about the 5090, which is kind of, I have a white, you're gonna hate this, right? I have a white Astral to put in her system, and the system is going to be spectacular. It's going to be a white system. I've been speccing it out. I'm super excited to build it. I want her to really, I'm going to put an LCD panel in. I want her to really love the look of it. She's not going to care about the fact that the CPU is great, but she will actually use the CPU. She has a channel. She has like 400,000 followers on Instagram. She has a YouTube channel. She does a lot of online things. She's done that way before I did, and she was the one that convinced me to do this. She does a lot of video editing and rendering, and the 5090 will be a huge advantage for her, just in time saved. So she really will use it. So that's what she'll like, right? Rowan's asking, is 285K and 5070 Ti a balanced build? So I highly recommend you look at the videos. I'll put some videos in the description to this live stream. So I answer all of those questions in the videos, but I would try and push for higher speed RAM than 6400 megatransfers per second. 285K, all Intel CPUs scale very well with higher speed RAM. So I would push for that. Whether it's balanced or not, you will always have a bottleneck somewhere. So it really depends on what your applications are. If you're doing like AI, like training algorithms, you're going to want as much VRAM as possible. So you might want to wait for the new supers to come out, which are supposed to come out with a lot more VRAM. So if that's what you're doing, if you're doing rendering, if you're using the CPU, then yeah, you know, like having the RAM will be helpful. If you're using the GPU, that'll be good. You will notice an advantage, obviously, with 5090. It really depends on what your professional applications are, right? So Rowan was also asking if 4K is a significant upgrade from 1440p in terms of editing, gaming, and productivity. Well, so in terms of gaming, I think it's a huge upgrade. I notice it, right? It's very noticeable. Having a good monitor to be able to show that is important too, and having powerful enough components to generate high 1% lows, you know, and have smooth gameplay, that's all part of the experience, right? So in terms of productivity, it depends. If you're looking at images on screen, 4K can be a huge advantage. And it can be basically no advantage depending like if you're training AI algorithms. So it really depends on what you do. So defining what you're going to specifically use it for can really help answer those questions. But I have a lot of content on the channel that can go through and really help guide you in this decision, right? That's what most of my content is about, helping you make the right choice every time. Okay, so let's move on a little here, and let's move on to the next topic, which was I don't know how many weeks ago now, I did a video. I was very curious to see how AI and ChatGPT in particular would do tuning a CPU. I had a bunch of comments. I've had a lot over the last few months saying, I can just use ChatGPT to do this. And I thought to myself, cool, let me try it and see what happens. So this is the video. Can AI tune a Ryzen 7 9800X3D better than me? So the question is, can it? So the first thing is, I ran a bunch of, queries on ChatGPT to say, and I put them in the video, the actual queries I use, so you can rerun them and it'll change over time. But this is what ChatGPT recommended. Recommended PBO enabled, interesting. An undervolt of -20, okay, that's all right. Memory of DDR5 6000, that's good. Infinity Fabric, it actually recommended 3000. Now, watch my videos if you're not sure, but a 3000 megahertz Infinity Fabric FCLK, your computer won't boot. I can guarantee you that your computer won't boot, right? So you'll get popped out into BIOS after a few times of trying. So that was just garbage. So I made that 2000 because that was wrong, right? There's no question. It also recommended changing the C state to disabled and SMT control to disabled, and then Windows Power Plan to high performance. So some of that's good. Some of it is very, very bad advice, but some of it was good. So what I did is I did my usual PBO to advanced, letting the motherboard set those constraints, a 2x scaler, 150 megahertz CPU boost, -30 all-core curve offset. I'm not penalizing it in the sense of saying -20 is bad advice. It's not. But it should have said, start with say -5 or -10 and test and see what your stable number is for your chip, because it's very chip dependent, silicon dependent. I use DDR5 8000, which gives you a small advantage, and a refresh interval of 65,535, which really drops your latency. Infinity Fabric of 2000, I could have pushed that, but at 8000, if you look at my latest memory video, it's synchronized, so that's ideal. I have C-state control and SMT enabled. SMT, basically hyperthreading. It's the standard term for hyperthreading. And Windows Power Plan on high performance, which was the same. So the question is, what happened? So in Total War Warhammer 3, and the results are in the video, you can see them all here. I'll just pick a couple. There was a significant advantage to tuning it my way. You had from the baseline, which is at the bottom, you got an increase in 1% lows of 13% and 4% in average. Now remember, on the GQI, this game was really tough because of the difference between 1% lows and average highs here. What would be interesting is to cap your, if I was playing this game with this particular chip and graphics card, I would, 5090 by the way, but I would cap, I would set a limit for my monitor, say 240 or something, and that would help to reduce or increase your GQI playability. Okay, put that aside. For the AI tuned, it actually went backwards from default, so it got worse. 7.7% lower, 1% lows, and 5.7% average. So basically, if you followed the advice of ChatGPT, you would crash your system. Then if you figured out that that advice was bad and you actually dial it in, you would get much lower performance. Awesome. AI is so amazing, right? So across the board, I only tested 5 games for this. Across the board, Blackbird PC Tech. So my optimization was dominant across the board. Like in Microsoft Flight Simulator, nearly double 1% lows, same as in Cyberpunk. Where, in Black Ops 6, the 1% lows for ChatGPT went down 12% from baseline, whereas for my tune it went up 5%. So yeah, I mean, watch the video if you're interested and wondering. But I also tested, because I was curious, what the impact of disabling SMT was. So I disabled SMT for mine and ran some benchmarks, and I show that in the video as well. But yeah, that did not help a lot, right? Things went backwards. In one game, it helped a little, I think. I think it was Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. It helped a little. So yeah, if you're wondering, ChatGPT, awesome. And use it as an assistant. Use it as guidance, right? Like, how do I optimize this? But please check out my videos and start there, and then use ChatGPT as a supplement. Like, it should be an assistant. It shouldn't be the go-to source. And I get questions like this day after day on the channel saying, I ran this, and I asked them, why did you do that? And they said, ChatGPT told me to. And I'm like, that's not a good idea, right? So yeah, okay, let me catch up. Steven, great to have you here, buddy. Yeah, West Coast, so yeah, it's a little early, right? 9:50, hopefully you have coffee. Appreciate that, Rowan. 10:16 p.m. in India, so I appreciate you staying up late, Rowan. That's great. Hey, DeZeus, thanks for joining, buddy. Good to have you here, as usual. Appreciate the people that come in and support the channel regardless of what day or time or other things. I really do appreciate that. Let's see. Okay, moving on. So I did have a topic which was, and I'll use this as the kind of the thing to talk about the topic, but does the background of the tech tuber, right, the YouTuber, really matter? And I would argue that it really does. So your technical background matters, and the reason I believe it does, and I'll give you a few examples, but a couple of things. I've noticed that I've noticed that a lot of channels will push misinformation and not do it intentionally. And that comes down to just no technical background, no relevant technical background. Now, you know, anyone can start a channel. There's no requirements. There's no minimum requirements. But this is a technical space, right? These are PC and it's tech. So having a technical background absolutely helps you. One of my favorite channels is vBios channel, and he has a strong technical background and has a lot of experience. Now, experience matters too, and I'm not saying that you can't have an amazing channel and not have a strong technical background. You can, but to me, they're far and few between. The predominant thing that I see is that people start a channel because they want to be on camera, which is fine, but then start a channel in a different domain, right? Now, they are a little bit more entertaining on camera. It took me a long time to try to get semi-comfortable on camera. I do not like being on camera, but I just love and am passionate about the tech. And I think it matters when it comes to little things, right, that really matter. I'll give you an example. Jay from Jay's 2 Cents often talks about positive pressure and negative pressure in a case. And it's complete and utter garbage. I want you to know how complete and utter garbage that is. There's no physics behind that. When you've got a highly perforated case, you can't create a meaningful pressure gradient within the case relative to the ambient outside the case. You can't. Imagine you get a balloon, right? A kid's balloon, and you punch holes in the balloon and you try and blow the balloon up. If the balloon doesn't have holes in it, it'll blow up and there will be a higher pressure inside the balloon than there is outside the balloon. That's a pressure gradient, all right? If you put holes in the balloon, do you think the balloon will blow up? Right? Now, if you have one tiny, tiny hole, you might be able to do it, and then it'll slowly go down. But we're talking about perforated cases with lots and lots of airflow, lots and lots of holes. You can't create a pressure gradient. Stop spreading crap. It's utter crap. And it's because of no technical background, right? There's lots of cases and examples of, you know, people that have started channels and, you know, like the guy worked at Newegg in shipping and receiving. Cool, that's great. But I wouldn't listen to him for technical advice, right? And that's where the misinformation gets spread. And I you know, it's a problem for me, like seeing so much misinformation. How do we control misinformation? And this video that I'm gonna talk a little bit about was all about misinformation. And I don't think it's intentional. I think So part of it's about clicks and other things, I get it. But part of it is not intentional. You know, I really do think it's a lack of understanding. And when you push people like Hardware Unboxed, Steve's background, I think he's afraid to be discovered as a fraud because he does not have a strong background. And so when I'm going to do a video in the future around testing at stock and testing overclocked and tuned, because you do need to see both. And these people that push that you only need to see stock is nonsense. Buy a console. But you can't say you have to test at stock, but then be okay with overclocking your memory running XMP or Expo. That's an overclock. So run it completely at stock. Like, PCs are designed to be modified, right? Take a card in and out, replace components, tune and optimize. It's okay to show stock data. In fact, I would recommend it. But also, as tech YouTubers, our job should be to inform the viewers and show tuned and optimized data so that the viewer can make an informed choice. I'm not saying the viewer has to tune and optimize, but they should have the data to say, do I want to tune and optimize? But what you see is you see these channels that have no technical background. There's so many of them, right? I don't want to throw them all under the bus, but they will push this narrative that it's wrong or dangerous to tune and optimize, and that's utter garbage. That's lack of technical insight and, you know, kind of background. And I really do think it comes from the technical background. Imagine, you know, you hop on an airplane and the pilot says, you know what? I'm pretty good at flying. I was never trained and I have no technical background in flight, and I don't know everything, but I'm pretty good at it. I don't know, I kind of want a pilot that's been through pilot training. What happens when failures happen? What happens when things go out? How do you respond in those situations? That's how I want my pilot. That's how I want my doctor. That's how I want, you know, technical fields. I want people to be educated in those technical fields, or at least something similar. Be an engineer, a physicist, or something, right? So yeah, you don't have to be a PhD, right? Don't get me wrong. Right? And there's lots of people that I think that don't have technical backgrounds that produce excellent work. Like my colleague, Jufus, doesn't have a technical background. I think that he has a lot of experience and understands things. I think that there's some things he does that would be helped by having more of a deep technical background. But nonetheless, I think there's channels like that to do a good job. I do think that when we start arguing about things like AM dip and other things and not having the data to back it up, I think that's where things break down. I think it shouldn't be, I'm asking you to provide data, not because I dislike you. It should be, I'm asking you to provide data because that is the right scientific approach to proving something, right? That's all it's about. You shouldn't be offended at that. Someone comes on my comments and says, you know, Intel is better. I'm like, that is an opinion. It's not data. If someone comes on and says, hey, I ran these benchmarks and I got this data and then I got this data and it was this and it's different than your results, I will engage and I will check my data and say, hey, I've made a mistake, or hey, did you do this, or whatever it may be. That's the right way to have these conversations. I think that will help prevent the spread of misinformation. So with that said, right, let's see. So with that said, I did a video, actually my last video was on flashing the BIOS of a 9070 with a 9070 XT vBios. And I explained how to do it and I showed data. Tech Power Up, Tom's Hardware, and Video Cards all ran the headline that you're gonna yield 25%. This one was at least up to 25%. This one gains 25% performance. At least it said synthetic. This one, 25% improvement, right, up to. All right, that's the headline. Most of these articles never went in and dug into what it really was about, right? So they have these like really flashy headlines. This was the video, right, that I ran, so you can check it out on the channel. I tried to use the flash symbol here. I don't know if most people know what that is, but that's like the Flash, the superhero. But anyway, check that out. And, you know, this is the before and after when you flash. Now, if you're not technically inclined, you wouldn't know that after RDNA 3, when you flash a vBios using software, the vBios is bifurcated. So you're only flashing one of them. You actually have to flash one, reboot, and then flash the other. Otherwise, every other time that you boot up, you could be using a BIOS that has not been flashed. Again, details matter, right? You tell someone to do this, the details really matter, right? So I got a pretty good boost there. But when I actually ran the numbers, I got very mild overclocks. So I got around 5% increase in performance by flashing the BIOS. Now, there's a huge risk in flashing the vBios, right? Would only recommend, like I say in the video, to do it if you have a dual BIOS switch. But there are risks. You can brick your card. So for 5%, I wouldn't recommend. The other thing I noticed, which is interesting, is really cool to come out and claim 25% improvement when the actual 9070 XT is not 25% faster. And so this is where it breaks down, because some of the comments were, hey, well, you used a higher power card. I did, but I compared it to a 9070 XT with a higher power limit too. So if you use a lower power limit card, right, like a Reaper, you need to compare it to a 9070 XT Reaper, and the 9070 XT Reaper is not 25% faster. So it's garbage data. So they took this data from a random person on Reddit, and we all know what Reddit's like, right? I mean, I wouldn't trust that for anything. They took this data from Reddit and ran with the title. Some random dude on Reddit claims 25%. Let us run articles. Tech Power Up should have checked it. Tom's Hardware should have checked it. We should expect more from these companies, right? And this is just bad. And I do wonder if the lack of technical background really impacts this, right? The other fascinating thing I found is that if you simply tune and optimize an RX 9070, you get, for example, in Speedway, better performance than if you flash the card with a 9070 XT. So no risk situation, low risk, very, very, very low risk tuning and optimizing your card. I would argue no risk, versus very high risk flashing the BIOS, and you get basically no performance benefit. So I ran that in a few games, and you can see here, there's no benefit here at the max overclock to flashing a BIOS. Just tune and optimize the card. And that was the recommendation from the video. So yeah, that's a problem. And this is the other thing. You can see that just massively increasing the power limit here. The top curve here is a 9070 XT. The bottom curve is a 9060 XT. You can see that it doesn't just keep going up. It starts to curl over. So massively increasing the power limit, you're going to get a very, very small diminishing return. You're going to hit an asymptote, basically. Diminishing return on score. Same thing for 9060 XT. Same thing for 9070 is going to be somewhere in the middle. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but you got to really understand what you're doing to be able to produce data like this, right? And I really do have a problem with that. So, hey, let me, before I move on, and we're going to wrap up soon because it's getting late. Let me have a look at some of the questions here. Let's see. Dezus said, Jay has me so worried about positive and negative pressure for a bit. Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? If you think of the video I just went through, do you know how many people would have bricked their cards because they saw a headline on one of these, very big media outlets, tech media outlets, and brick their card chasing something they could have done just by tuning and optimizing? I mean, that's the problem here. All right, so the positive and negative pressure, the worst that it can do is, I guess, mess up your airflow. And by the way, the actual answer, just focus on airflow. Try to match the number of fans. So the air, everything is dominated by the flow coming through the fan. Doesn't matter, don't worry about pressures. Just focus on the flow. So if you got three fans blowing cool air in, try to have 3 or 4 fans blowing exhaust air out, right? That's all it is, right? Okay, let's see. Yeah, Jesse said Jay is such a sensationalist. Yeah, I mean, he is, and I use that as just one example, right? But, so, yeah, I mean, he's kind of interesting to watch sometimes, and he does some interesting things, but yeah, his tech advice is terrible. He made the same mistake with the, if you remember the video around the NVIDIA, like it's always pile on NVIDIA. NVIDIA screwed up their drivers. It wasn't. Jay screwed up. Gave really bad advice, right? Let's see. Oh, been playing Battlefield 6. Yeah, I have to test that. I have to figure it out. So, hey, so first of all, I mentioned this last time. Thank you. The channel hit 25,000 subscribers. So thank you so much for that. Bottom of my heart. Really appreciate it. This is the Prism case that we're going to be giving away. I just completed a build. And we're also going to be giving away a 9800X3D or 265K. I think I'll give away the K, not the KF. I can't remember. But anyway, one of these chips. It's not going to matter. You get to choose. The winner will get to choose. I'm going to try and do the drawing in a couple of weeks. That's the plan at the moment. I'll give you the exact date on the channel. These are the components I use. So just a sneak peek for this community. A bunch of stuff sponsored by InWin. So this cooler was really cool. Very unique. Very cool. No pun intended. It's a very unique cooler that creates a lot of downflow air on the motherboard. So it helps cool the VRM and even a little bit of the CPU. So that was interesting. I did not know InWin made PSUs, but they make really good quality PSUs. So I use this. It's a 1050 watt, what is it, platinum rated PSU. So really good quality. And I use their fans as well. Nice fans, and the case obviously. Used a Tomahawk. I wanted to go more affordable. What I wanted to do was try and produce a more affordable 4K machine. So I used the Tomahawk. I got a phenomenal deal, like $220 for that motherboard. By the way, the reason is that they sent me the motherboard. It was scratched. One of the SSD covers got loose and scratched the motherboard a little. And so I said, hey, can you send me a new motherboard? They said, you can keep the same motherboard and get $50 back or get a new motherboard. I was like, I'll take the $50. That's awesome. So I got a really good deal. Really good deal on the 265K. I think it was $200 during a Prime Day. I used 8400 non-CUDIM RAM. I wanted to keep that a little more affordable. And the thing I splurged a little bit on is the 5070 Ti Vanguard. That was the only 5070 Ti I had, and I wanted to use that since this was an Intel build. Otherwise, I would have used a 9070 XT. So I put that all together. That's the next video. Looks pretty cool. Here's a sneak peek with the lights on. What's really cool is the glass side, when the lights are off, is a mirror. It's a mirror finish. And so my daughter said to me, she came in and saw it up on my workbench here, and she said, wow, that looks cool. It looks like you bought it from somewhere. And that's a compliment. I was like, wow, you know I do this for a living, right? But anyway, so I thought I'll take that. That was a nice compliment. So yeah, so that's where we're at. That's the next video. It's going to be a build video. I'm also going to show you what you do once you build, right? So updating the BIOS, updating the drivers, installing Windows, right? By the way, I'll show you the workaround for Windows instead of the bypass NRO, but I'm pretty sure that Windows just like yesterday or the day before got rid of that. They really want you to use a Windows login. So I'm going to have to start using Linux, I think. But anyway. All right. Let's see. Tony, yeah, well, I mean, hopefully, buddy. If I'm at 30,000, I'll take it, man. I'll take it. Yeah, I'm at 26 something now, and it's been growing pretty consistently. So I really appreciate. I'm so grateful for that. I really am. I'm so grateful for this community and the community, the members we have, and the community on Skool. And I'm just so grateful because I really think it's a positive community too. You know, when someone comes on and like, you know, I think we all know who we're talking about here in Skool and says, hey, I bought a 285K and put that together. Oh, I bought a 9950 X3D because I had FOMO and put that together. I went back to 285K. I don't want people to jump in and go, what the hell's wrong with you? I want people to go and understand, hey, that's our disease, right? Our disease as enthusiasts is always wanting that next best thing. And I can relate to that, right? And so, but I want a positive community. I want people to say, I chose a 14600K and I did this. I don't want people to jump down their throat and say, why didn't you choose this? I want people to have like a good dialogue. And that's the kind of community I'm trying to generate here, right? I don't care whether it's AMD, Intel, you know, NVIDIA, it doesn't matter, right? If you produce something that you're happy with and you're happy with your build, I want to help you get the most out of it so that you enjoy what you do, right? That's really what I want. So, cool thing. Yeah, Tony, yeah, kids definitely have no filters. I completely agree. I was good. I loved how she had to add in, but I mean that as a compliment. I was like, cool, thank you. Anyway, let's see. I appreciate it, Tony and Jesus. Yeah, we're growing, and we're gonna do. I think I promised the start of November we're gonna do a drawing for that 4K 240 hertz monitor. So I'm gonna do that early in November there as well. That's just for the Skool community, the Blackbird Army members. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. And I'll be honest, right? The GQI that I developed is so much better because we discussed it within the Skool community, and the people that are in there are passionate about this and gave me great suggestions. And that's why I think the GQI is I think it's a great tool, but I developed it with the help of the Skool members, right? I know you would, Tony. I understand, man. Anyway, I agree. Let's see, last question. Steven, I had a R5 4500 laying around, so I built a computer. Yeah, man. And build with what you got and put it together and see what it can do. There's so many things you can use it for, right? And one of the things I have to figure out, and I'll let you know about this, I don't know what to do with this build. And so I am very likely just going to give this build away. I don't know how I'm not going to give away the GPU because it's my only 5070 Ti, and I actually really like this GPU. So I'm going to give away the build. I might put a different GPU on there because I do have a spare, but I'm going to leave it in the box if I ship this to someone and not put it in the CPU, so in the motherboard, I'm sorry, in the case, because I don't want it to move around. I do have the box for this. I could ship it somewhere. If someone's willing to pay shipping, I may give this away in Skool. Haven't figured it out yet, but I'm definitely going to give it away. I just don't know how I'm going to do it or what I'm going to do yet. So keep that in mind, right? So as you watch the video, I haven't announced that yet. I guess I just announced it here, but keep that in mind. So with that said, I really appreciate you spending some of your Sunday here and going through this. I'd love to get your feedback on GQI. So go to the community post if you can, and if you've got thoughts, put them down. If you think that I should lower that lower bound for red, I'm kind of thinking I should lower it to maybe 0.67 from 0.7. I think that would make sense. And any other suggestions that you have, throw them in there. It was really interesting to me yesterday when I went through and did those numbers and put it in. I think it's going to be meaningful, and I think we're going to be able to start a revolution within our industry here. I think in a year, everyone's going to be using GQI. Which is what I want, right? I don't want to say, hey, you have to pay me to use this. I don't want that. I want people to be using this, and I want to inform the viewers of what they can expect, right? That's really what I want. So really appreciate everything, and good luck with the drawing for the 25K competition with InWin and the CPU. And also, if you're in Skool, good luck with the monitor. I'm looking forward to doing those drawings soon. I'm going to announce more about that coming up. I'm focused on getting that build video together for next Friday, I'm hoping, at the latest next Saturday. I'm making some changes with respect to editors, so bear with me here. So it may be a day late, but looking forward to doing that. Appreciate you spending your day with me. I really do appreciate you all. Have an awesome rest of your day on Sunday. If you're in the Northeast like I am, there's a huge storm coming. If you're in Jersey, New York, Connecticut, so stay safe if you're in the Northeast. If not, enjoy your weekend.